Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this talk on vernacular photography. Everyone Goes Vernacular, a panel on the rising popularity of vernacular photography, Vernacular toute la sauce, our French title for this panel discussion. One reason why we initiated this, thanks to France PhotoBook, there goes my thanks also to the team who invited me to host this panel, was because vernacular photography and exhibitions, including vernacular photography, are becoming more and more popular. We see it, that word even vernacular, more and more used in all sorts of exhibition texts. There's sort of an omnipresence of archives and anonymous photos and found photos, and sort of the old photographic material starts to be more and more pretty much everywhere. And that term vernacular photography embeds itself sometimes randomly, sometimes precise. And we thought it's a good idea to host a conversation around that topic of the popularity, but also we will discuss a little bit what vernacular photography actually means, what do we include, what do we exclude, where's the flexibility of that term. So let me first introduce our panelists here. We start with Chiara Capodice. I'm going to read this, so I'm not making any mistakes. Chiara Capodice is a curator and a book designer, a bookshop owner based in Rome. Since 2005, she has been immersed in the world of photography, curating exhibitions and photo books. In 2017, she launched Leparello. That's a photo book shop and product space dedicated to the photo book and independent publishing in Rome. Through workshops, talks, and exhibitions, Chiara has become a central figure in Italian's photo book scene. I've known about her much longer than I've known her. So it's great to get to know you for real also. She works on thoughtful storytelling, collaborative production. She also teaches at Spazio Labo and Officine Fotografiche, and regularly is the juror of International Photo Book Awards. And she is very philosophical in her approach, and I love the way usually when you ask one question, you get about 6 different angles in the answer, and that makes her a wonderful addition to this round table discussion. Next to her, Ramon Reverte is the editor and creative director of editorial RM, an independent publishing house based in Mexico City and in Barcelona. RM is recognized as a reference in the field of photography and contemporary Ibero-American art, with more than 400 titles published. I have many of his books. Also, I knew his work and books much before I actually met you in person. He oversees the editorial production with a focus that balances on conceptual rigor and very, very meticulous editing. Throughout his career, he has played a key role in strengthening the publisher's international presence. He regularly takes part in fairs, also here. He's also a juror and professional events in the photography world. His personal photo book collection, which I heard is quite enormous, more than 4,000 titles with a specific focus on the Latin American world, but also Spain, Japan, and the United States. And he has also a very extensive vernacular collection with 10,000 photos, especially from Mexico, that he gathered on flea markets over the years. And if you go on his Instagram, you can see some of these jewels. I mean, marvels. There's also a book that recently came out. We have it hidden somewhere here. Where did we just put it? Down there. That comes out with a tiny, tiny fraction of his collection. So that's sort of a Las Mexicanas. And next to Ramon, Luce Lebar is a historian of photography, an exhibition curator and a researcher. She's also the former director of the collection at the Société Française de Photographie. Her curatorial work spans from the National Gallery of Canada to here in Arles, to the Photo Festival. Luce has a remarkable talent for unearthing forgotten archives, as seen in her acclaimed exhibitions Gold and Silver. The Invention Saga, her works explores the intersection between photography, science, memory, marginal histories with a very, I would say, keen eye for visual power and political nuances. She also collaborates closely with the Archive of Modern Conflict. In case some people of you know it, it's a very, very mysterious, incredible archive that deals with the vernacular on a very large sort of scale. And she's known for producing compelling narratives out of these vernacular photography deposits. And since 2022, she has been co-artistic director of the Fotografia Europea Festival in Italy. My name is Lukas Birk. I was asked to host this event as I'm deeply engaged with archives and vernacular photography as a researcher. I work primarily in conflict areas and have a publishing house called Fraglich Publishing that exclusively deals with vernacular photography, archives, and sort of the research of the past. Now, maybe to start with, let's dive into this term vernacular, because I think there's still a little bit of a questioning. What does this term entail? Where does it come from? At a talk yesterday, William, who sits here, also asked, what is this? What is this term vernacular? So, it is out there. The way we use it, or the way it was used before photography, had more to do with architecture and the vernacular architecture, meaning the non-professional form of architecture. Like when I build a house, it's definitely very vernacular because my building skills are dubious. But I think it's also a very good way if we think about us, for example. We are non-native speakers in English, so we have an Italian, Spanish, French, and an Austrian here. And the way we use the English language is definitely vernacular, because we don't speak a high standard of English. We all have our ways of using it, just the way a dialect is appropriating a language to a regional standard, and that's vernacular. So I like language a lot because language is very fluid. Language changes constantly and it's evolving. And that's for me how we can see vernacular as in something that is not a standardized form, but a living form. And that's what I like with vernacular. That's why I also like vernacular photography. But this is just my interpretation, and I thought we, as a starting point, sort of go across the seats here and see where vernacular, just the terminology, before we dive deeper into other parts, sort of stands with you. Maybe, Luce, if we could start with you, sort of to add on what within your work, your understanding, also as a historian, this sort of where this vernacular stands right now.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. First of all, I'd like to say that the word vernacular, it probably works very well in English, but for me, I find it when we use it in French a bit not very accessible still now. It's not very clear. It's not, popular. I'm not sure everybody understands it. Each time I talk about it with friends and they ask me, but what is it? What does it mean? So this is the first thing, and maybe another word could be imagined together to talk about what is not art. For me, as a whole, vernacular photography concerns any practice that is not made, any photographs, any that is not made with an artistic intention. It's photography that is not made for the museum, that is not exhibited in the museum. And as you say, this notion is super fluid because, of course, now vernacular photography enters the museum, and we have a huge evidence of that here with the great collection of Lumière des Roses. You probably have seen their beautiful exhibition in Cloître Saint-Trophine. This is a collection of vernacular photographies they've made for years that has been acquired by Antoine de Galbert, who has made a donation to the Musée de Grenoble. So now it's institutionalized. So maybe this is a word that could be revised. But to sum it up, for me, vernacular photography and vernacular practice of history of photography is linked to the margins, what has been a bit overlooked, and practice that are not artistic, voluntarily, intentionally artistic.
Yeah, maybe I will pass it on. Ramon, for you, I mean, you come also from a different angle, I would say. I mean, you come from a historic point of view. How does that term vernacular work for you, or how would you say do you even use that word when you think about your collection?
I do, but at the beginning, it was not clear to me what was vernacular. I didn't know exactly what it engaged, so I was just looking a definition, and maybe it's that one, which is vernacular photography is everyday, non-artistic imagery made by ordinary people reflecting personal or social life. I think that explains everything. I mean, it's these are the photos that you found that have been taken without an artistic idea in mind. It's just the everyday photos you take for whatever the reason. And of course, my collection is based in Mexico. When I go in Mexico to the flea markets, there are thousands and thousands of photos. And of course, a lot of them are really bad, like you can imagine, but there's some are really, really great. I was talking yesterday to a guy called William Hunt, which has published a lot of things and has a large collection. And he said that for him, the good vernacular photographers are those that have mystery and composition. And that's something that it's amazing. I mean, as time passes, there's more mystery, more layers in the photos because we forget about many, 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 many things. It's like I can imagine like someone that has been really related with vernacular photography. It's William Eggleston. When he took the photos, no one understood that because they were so common, so banal that no one could understand nothing. Then when we see the images of William Eggleston now, we see a lot of things that at the time were given by, I mean, there was something normal and they are not. So with vernacular photography, maybe 100, 150 years have passed and they have a different meaning, a complete different meaning. And there's a lot of mystery because we cannot read those images unless we have learned a lot of what happened at that time and why these peoples are behaving the way they're behaving, the dresses they are, where the picture was taken. So it's something that it's very attractive. That word mystery, I think it defines perfectly what for me it's a good vernacular photography.
That's beautiful because every vernacular photography, we talk about something in the past, so we always have time. And the time is a big element within that photograph. So I quite like that mystery actually, because mystery includes a spatial and also a temporality, and so that's really nice. I will add that to my definition. Chiara, what's that term for you? I mean, you come also from a more philosophical background. You do a lot of educational elements also within your within your practice.
I like the fact that you imagine me like this big, like overthinker that sometimes goes beyond the limits we are supposed to have. But I think that mystery is a key word to understand it and going beyond this separation between artistic and not artistic. So today, while talking about this talk altogether, now we went back to what we could find as a definition of vernacular. For instance, in such a key institution in the history as MoMA was for a long time. And we all agreed that it was a limit to understand the vernacular from that limited point of view. But so I like etymology a lot. And if you go to vernacular, vernacular comes from Latin vernaculum, that is like something that is a little bit before a dialect, not even a language, but what in French can be called patois, for instance, no, and the terms come from, as we were reminding together, from Verna, that was the slave who got born in his master's house. So it brings back also to a domestic endeavor, no, and from something that also connects us to another aspect of photography. Photography probably also has a relational mean. I mean, it's something that connects the viewer to the world and the viewer of photography to an imaginary world.
So that's the slave that was born in the master's house and pre-dialect.
Yes.
When we go from etymological
Yes.
point of view. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's already quite a lot.
Yeah, I just want to add something concerning the recognition of vernacular photography in France. We have a historian of photography called Clément Chéroux who's been promoting vernacular photography a lot and he's made it enter the museum, he's made an exhibition, and it's very interesting because he published in 2013 a first book called Vernacular, in which it was all about snapshots, like domestic photography, and he republished it in 2024, so like 1 year ago, and there he included scientific photography, administrative photography, practices that are non-artistic, but not necessarily linked to the domestic field. So there is a heart of vernacular photography linked to this everyday life photography. But for us, historians, at least, we really embrace the many uses of photography, practices and uses that are not artistically intentional nowadays.
And I think that's as we said before, there's something beautiful with vernacular. That term and the field is still very flexible in terms of what we include within this realm. And as you said, any administrative photograph that has actually something professional attached to it, with time, it can sort of still slip into the vernacular. And you were mentioned MoMA before. So MoMA has a sort of definition of what is vernacular, and many people refer to that because when you Google it, that's more or less the first thing that comes up. So it becomes this reference, but they're more differentiating fine art as being fine art photography, and then the rest, and that's vernacular. So, but that's a very specific point of view from a MoMA perspective, which we understand why it is there. Just out of curiosity, we go a little bit deeper into your own personalities, maybe first, before we dive into something else I'm curious about, sort of where your personal interest comes in terms of vernacular. Like, what is your access point? Because we have photographers here in the audience and makers. Some of you might work with vernacular photography. Some are curious to dive into it or want to create a collection or have a collection. So where is your sort of personal access to it? Maybe we start with you again.
I would say it's really linked to family photography, my own family photography. My family come from North Africa, and we had a kind of huge suitcase, metallic suitcase, where all the snapshots and photos were gathered in France when we were in France. And so with my cousin, we used to play with those this mass of images and travel. So it's always the same for me. It's a way of traveling in time and traveling in space and discovering things that are invisible. So this is the first really strong link. And the second one, I would say I belong to a generation of historians that has been, that has discovered photography through books, and books where photography was usually published in black and white, like PhotoBook. They were cheap, accessible, all the same size images, black and white. And it was something that collided with what I was living with true photographs that were sometimes on metal, object, artifact. So, so this is how I started being aware, searching for images on flea markets and also mainly in institutions to try and find what is hidden behind classical, traditional history of photography books. The real photography, where was it?
I think, I mean, I think that's now we have even a more of an extension of this, because you say you had your posh standardized kind of photo book, but now we're standardized on the screens. So the photo has lost its touch. And I guess that's also something we'll talk a little bit later, is that's why the object, the print, the vernacular, I guess, has even more of a rise right now, because we need the tactility of it. How about you? I mean, you're a massive collector, so
Yeah, I've been a collector my whole life. I was born in a publisher family. My family used to publish scientific and technical books, which is not the field I'm interested in, but I was always surrounded by books. So I started buying books and books and books, and then I went to Mexico to live there for 13 years, and I started collecting books, visual books in Mexico, and I got a huge collection of books. And then I realized, because most of these books I bought at flea markets, that there were a lot of pictures over there, a lot. And a lot of them were just thrown away, so they will just disappeared. And then I was thinking for a lot of time, what kind of photographies I would like to start like collecting. Because as a collector, you know, you have to focus on something. But you don't focus on photography. It's such a wide world. So I started collecting photographies because of this, because I thought they will be lost, and they were so pretty, so beautiful. And then once you start, you keep collecting, because it's like the same in France. I mean, if you go to Paris to the flea market, I mean, you get photos for nothing, and some of them are really nice. And once you start doing a collection with a focus on something, whatever it is, I think you can do a great collection because there are millions of photos. Now that's something that it's now available all over, but I think maybe in 20, 30, 40 years there will be none, and there will be in museums or in places, and now you can get a nice collection. That's something I always try doing it. So people that collect, that they start collecting photos, not for the sake of collecting, photos, but because I've seen so many photos that have been lost because no one wanted them, because there are so many thrown away, and then in the end they just are gone. So I feel we have to all of us in a way preserve this
There's a call for action.
archive. Yes.
Just don't collect what I collect, okay? So yeah, but absolutely. And how about you? I'm sure you have a very different entry.
Well, actually, despite the fact that I work with photo books, I wouldn't describe myself as a collector, on the opposite. But again, I guess my unaware encounter with vernacular photography was, as loose in a way, a familiar one. I remember I had two grandaunties who loved to travel a lot. And once my mother was talking on the phone with them, and I was telling her, tell them that I want to travel like them. And they sent me a picture. And the picture was about two tiny ladies in front of a pyramid in the 20s. And for me, this was a big, big symbol of freedom and of will to travel. So I wouldn't describe that picture as a collectible item, but as again a relational mean. No, I kept as a treasure.
But that's the beauty when we have so many of the works now that are on family histories, that use family albums, that we have a universal connection to it. And I mean, that's also what we see in many exhibitions, we see in many more photo books, is exactly that. We can find connections to an individual photo, a series of photo, even if it's in another country, that in the end relates to us because it's that living history.
Yeah, even though this family thing can be tricky, because I witnessed that it can also push people toward an introverted view of what vernacular photography is, and can limit the potential of vernacular photography.
So we started this panel here with a question of sorts. Everyone's gone for vernacular. I mean, this can be a statement or this can be a question, because we said vernacular is on the rise. We see more exhibitions. We see a lot more artists working with it. We have more institutions that are interested in the sort of everyday photography. But there's a question a little bit to maybe differentiate or understand not only the material, but how we engage with the material. So maybe, Luce, for you, how do we collect is important. Do we collect? Do we create archives? What are the differences between a collector and an archivist, or a collection and an archive?
Yes, it's very different practice, and often the names are mixed, and we call an archive what is a collection, etc. But behind it is a very different way of collecting, and as well it leads to different ways of using the images. I would say that archiving, an archive is something that is created while you are working. It's something that sediments. It's the result of an activity. It's what you produce, an administration or a person, an individual during an activity. So it's something very organic. This is how it sediments. And on the other hand, a collection is something that starts from with a collector or a curator that is going to pick up things regarding his interests, his obsessions. So it's a choice. It's something that is chosen. It's very different. And archives are normally, it depends. What is very interesting is that it depends on the country we are in. We don't have the same system of archiving and collecting in museum and archive around the world. But yes, archive. Help me, because I think in I don't know how it is in Mexico, but I talked with colleagues from Paraguay, and they didn't have like the huge amazing structure of National Archive and Departmental Archive and Municipal Archive that we have in France. So they couldn't collect private archives. So for them, and administrative archives. So for them, going to flea market, and like you in Afghanistan, in Birmania, going to flea market and to places and collect archive was an archivist practice. You was like saving the archive, etc. So yeah, it's very two different practice and uses of images.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. That of course we're in Europe. We have very good structures. We have, as you say, naturally generated archives by our rigorous administrative system that creates these archives whether we want it or not. But this is not the case in actually most parts of the world where the collector can become an archivist. Because when you were saying this, I was just thinking, I have a project called the Myanmar Photo Archive. It's sort of the only visual depository of materials from Myanmar after independence, but maybe I should have called the Myanmar Photo Collection because it's me who is doing it, and not an administrative process.
Exactly. And if I can add something about archive, for me, archive is about links, and it's what is preserved in when we collect archive. Archive is like an archive is like a family with brothers, sisters, many artifacts that are links in between themselves. Paper, written notes, manuscript, photos. And if we keep the big family together, we keep the link in between the things. And this is what is very rich, very interesting for historians as well, and to keep the integrity of the archive. And when in a collection, it's much more picking up. And of course, you understand that for a historian of the future, it changes a lot of things if we keep all the links in between things.
Yeah, I guess that collectors are cherry picking. They collect the cherry on the cake. Yeah, and the cake gets lost. So the historian is interested in the cake and maybe not the cherry.
But yes and no, I know. I mean, probably in France it's different, but in Mexico, for instance, collectors create archives. I mean, they create an archive, and then you go, let's say in Mexico, the biggest archive is La Fototeca de Pachuca, which is Pachuca is a small place, and they have a big archives. And then you go into the Fototeca Pachuca, and they say, we have this archive, it's from that guy. This archive is from that guy. So the collectors make the archive in this case, no? And yes, they handpick, but then they all collectors have like a specialty, and they want to collect whatever they want, but it's a different thing. So in the end, for me, it's not that clear the difference between a collection and an archive, because most of the archives, even now, because we were talking with these two ladies from the US that live in Mexico, and they were creating like large archives of images, and they were giving it for free to museums. So the museum creates an archive, but it's based on a collection.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing in the end. Yeah. So I believe it's like.
Yeah, that's right. No, please. There's also, I was recently thinking there's a great example to look up in Hungary. There's the Fortepan archive. It's run by an individual who just gets donation of film rolls, and he just scans and he keeps whatever he thinks is worth keeping. And so it's a very individually selected archive, but it's so massive that it represents not only the country, but really the region, because we're talking hundreds of thousands of images. So, so there's this fluidity between the archive of a place and then the collection.
I think your description as a circle is very effective in describing a process that can start from a collection and then is systematized. And maybe we can also use the word catalog, no? And it brings back to the families you were talking about. In Roma there is this institution, ICCD, Istituto Centrale per il Catalogo e la Documentazione, Central Institute for Catalogation and documentation that gathers together several archives that comes from private collectors to like a more public service. And the thing is exactly what we were describing, creating a network that is easy to read from researchers and open one.
Now, the interesting thing is that, and we were talking about this earlier, is that vernacular photography, as we know, or the collection or the interest in this kind of field comes from people. And only later on, just about now, the interest starts to be there from institutions and museums and public gatherings and depositories. So they're sort of catching up with the people who are interested in that type of photography. And I think now we're at this point where we ask ourselves, like, how do we collect? What we sort of talked a little bit right now, how can we collect? What is collecting, what is archiving? But we're also at the point where we really should ask ourselves, what do we do with these collections? And I think that's where, at this moment, we have a real shift in the last 10, 15 years, where there's an explosion of people rethinking these depositories of images, whether they were archives created by sort of an organic process, as you described, or by collectors that made collections to a specific theme or purpose. So there's something that I would like to ask you, because you all work in different fields, from a curatorial aspect, making books, publishing books, being involved in education. Where are we right now in terms of how archives are being used, and what are the specificities for you where you think like, wow, this surprised me even that we are using archives in that way? And maybe we can start with you, because you do a lot of educational things. You are involved with a lot of young makers also, and you have a specific access, I think, to young photographers, aspiring makers that use also vernacular.
Yes, and I think now we started using also archive as a term, but getting back to that vernacular one, I think that most of time this is a trigger to investigating further topics. And just by chance today, a student who was not a student of mine, but is part of a PhotoBook award, came to show me a book that it's very interesting from this point of view, because it's a collection, or like literally coming from workers who collected what was left after the factory closed, and she had the chance to witness what this material can be used for, and she just used the raw material. Let's use this like easygoing word, in order to reconstruct an history that it's a union history, it's a factory history, and in a way it gives us a site that we can contextualize in a more structured way. Whereas many times it comes to family things, and it's like interrogating the past. No?
I think that's also in the workshops I give. The most usage of vernacular photography, and maybe there's some of you in the audience who use the sort of the family element or found images to create personal narratives, and also to deal with personal traumas, to deal with personal family traumas, and so on. So this we see a lot of in the publications, and I assume this is also within your field. You have a lot more narratives now that you've published that include in some ways vernacular photography.
Yeah, I do as a collector. What I do is I just collect on specific fields, because when you face such a big number of photos, you have to focus on something. So basically I collect in some called, like they call it in Mexico, red note photography, which is striking images that blend crime reporting with raw visual storytelling. That's what I got in the internet. And by the way, there's an exhibition now by Joan Foncuberta, and all the images are part of my collection, and it's people pointing at something, and that's part of this archive. Then I have another archive, which I think it's very interesting. It's about not now, but in the 30s, 40s, 50s, when you bought a car, it was something really special. So people took photos in front of a car. They were really proud of the car, and there was a way to showing that you were something more, or you were escalating in whatever it is in terms of economy. And they took a lot of photos, and they are really funny. And all are from Mexico. And the third collection I have is photography with a particular interest in images where women appear. Specifically, the empowering of women is what I've realized after buying so many pictures. So you start to see how the woman appear in the images at the beginning and till the 60s, from the 19th century to the 60s. And it's amazing how these things happen in Mexico. In Mexico, it's not the best place in terms of empowering a woman yet. But I mean, it's amazing. And so I think it tells many stories. But you realize that because I started like collecting what I want to collect. Well, images were women were these cars, red note. But then you start to realize there are a lot of things, and not only this, that you start like focusing more and more and more on what you want. Because if I'm interested in empowering and in women that are empowered in the photos, when I see something that really fits that thing I want to buy, and then I buy it. So it's like you get more focused on something, and then you create a really nice collection. Because a collection, it's interesting when it's really focused on something, not when it's so wide.
And how is it with books that you publish and artists that come to you and ask for publications or have projects? I mean, you must have seen an increase in the use of vernacular photography in
More and more, but it's not that they bring me vernacular photography. It's that they take photos that look like vernacular. Now I was seeing, for instance, at Monoprix, I was with a guy from Bolivia, and he's got a really nice work over there. I really love if you can go and see that. And basically, when he went to Bolivia at 4,000 meters. There's a big market, one of the biggest outdoor markets in Latin America, and he put a place, and then he started photographing people. He said like photos gratis, like for free you can take a photo. And then people went there and they took a photo, and he took the photo. It's like the German style of doing like these kind of things that you take one another photos that you have all
the German style.
they're really boring in a way, but at the same time it tells a lot of things, and it's very vernacular. And I was struck by it. I mean, so people, it's, I don't know, Todd Heido, which is a great photographer, and he also has a show at the Van Gogh space, and he says that the vernacular photography is like the final of everything, because now people take a lot of photos, but no one print the photos. So these archives will disappear as soon as you pass away. Forget it. It's like he defines it at the last frontier, and since they are physical, it's like with the books. When in the world of books started, like the e-books, the electronic books. Since I've been involved in the books, we went to Frankfurt. They created a whole big building just for ebooks, because that was the future. And those that were doing like paper books, forget about that. And it's the other way around. The ebooks keep going down now, and everyone wants to have a physical book, because it's intimate. You're not dealing with a computer that suddenly appears on email or whatever. I mean, you're reading something on paper, on the real thing. And I think vernacular has a lot to do
Yeah,
with this.
we're back to that object, the holding, the book
Yes.
you hold, the photo you hold, the materiality in that world that actually gives us a touch and a sensation, definitely. Luce, for you, because you've been creating a lot of exhibitions with all sorts of different thematics within the vernacular and different archives that you work with. Has this work become easier for you in the last years in terms of also more institutions, places are more interested in it, because we have this sort of that curiosity that's all of a sudden out there, also by maybe more structured institutions?
As a curator, I would say that I observe two things. First thing is the amount of new, emerging artists or artists that who use vernacular photography. It's really like more than half of the practice. This is something I also observe in schools of art where I teach, and this is impressive. Vernacular photography has something that is really attractive for reappropriation. And in Arles, we've had like around 2008, I think, when Jean Fontcuberta made a statement in the Antique Theater, I will always remember, he said to photographer, stop photographing the world, use images that are already here. Use them for your art. And this is something that is now totally part of all that we feel. I think we use them as a material, just as what we see, a tree, etc., to create, and to think or to create. And the other aspect, and to also, so it's much more easier today to exhibit artists working with vernacular photography. And I think institutions are much more aware as well as the heritage of the heritage value of their archive, of the potential also, because they can, it helps to understand their history. So they're really looking for enhancing their collection. And for me, as a historian also, all that is so interesting because it allows us to revise the way we see things, the way we see the world, not only works of art. I would take this example here. For example, this book I made with RVB Books and the National Research Center. It's a collection of invention from created during the war. This collection is now in the National Archive of France. And these images during the war were taken with a special device, very simple. Objects were taken on a neutral background, centered, and the other device was the objects shown while they are in the hand of the inventor. Let's say I will look at it with the hand of the inventor. What is very interesting is that after the war, you can see the same device was used to promote everyday life inventions. So you have here the same device of a soldier with its invention, which is a weapon, and then an inventor with his broom or hoover. So for me, this archive that is so interesting, it tells a kind of story of where does advertisement photography comes, because of course, it's a long story, but the everyday life object images are linked to advertisement. And so, I mean, what I want to say is that these archives are a way to revise or to make archaeology of our everyday way of thinking, seeing the world, and of how we see images, because we are in the world of images, but they've all been constructed. And vernacular photography has played a huge role in the construction of everyday life photography, which is everything that surrounds us.
Well, that's also interesting that the way you say that we've always our world, our physical world, we reuse the same things over and over again. There's buildings that stand for 300 years somewhere, and it has changed its meaning, it has changed its purpose. You've used it in art and photography, and you can use the same thing over and over again, and it has been by many painters, by many one object. And now we're at the stage where people can do the same with a photograph, and they can use the same photograph over and over again and rethink it and reconstruct it, and that also with vernacular photography. And I think that's very exciting. And I was thinking, Ramon, you were mentioning to me earlier that a big part, of course, is that also the way we think about classical photography from the 19th century is so inspired by vernacular photography. I mean, there's so many photographers that were inspired by vernacular photography that we actually know, but we think we of course think of them as professional photographers.
Yes, I mean, you wouldn't understand, let's say, Walker Evans or Eggleston, of course, or Lee Friedlander. I mean, he's like taking snapshots of whatever, but in a great way. And what about Martin Parr? I mean, he's basically shooting like every one of us in a way. I mean, he's so smart. But I mean, what I cannot understand yet is how history has been written without taking into account the importance of vernacular photography. I think it's, I mean, what we know of photography, when we go to shows like this or Paris Photo, is just like a lake. But vernacular photography is like a sea. It's so huge that I think it will take decades to clearly understand, or in a way put all the layers in place so we can clearly understand what it is. If we cannot even um, get to the point where we have a word that defines this kind of photography, forget about describing what is vernacular photography in general terms of how many layers are. So I think it's incredible how the influence and how it's been like forgotten in the history of photography and in the museums. Now it's starting. Museums are starting to collect because they have realized, but that's not because they want to. It's just because there are a lot of collectors giving for free photos, and they have to start doing this. The MoMA, for instance, it just published like I think it's 3 volumes of photography, and the first volume start with like vernacular photography in a way. So that says a lot. I mean, it's when it's already in the canon, we're good, but I mean, there's a long journey to go.
So, I mean, one of the questions, and I guess also that's a little bit within the title of this panel, is vernacular. It's that popularity right now, is that a hip hype, or you think there will be a descent again in the interest, or will that sort of, is it just now we have it, it's established, we'll keep that as a medium, as you say, it's, and John von Coberta said it's a medium we use, and it's there now for you to use forever? Or are we in a state where, you know, we have popularity like with many things, and then and sort of it will fade out a bit?
I think we're in a general context where analogical photography is being more and more regarded as like a historical heritage thing to preserve. I don't know what, I think it's in Germany that it was recently sorted out as a historical heritage to protect analogical photography in general. And yes, I think this materiality of photography is something that is gonna be, it's not gonna stop being important. And
I mean, here's a context also. Some might not be aware, but if we go back 20 years when digitization started and digital cameras and digital scanning processes, so many administrative systems and structures were just digitizing everything and dumped the rest away. You could really go through dumpsters of big archives and get the treasures of the last 100 years. And this is en masses. This was done in the US and in Europe. And now we're only 20 years later. There's already a shift in terms of the materiality of these archives, that actually there was a value towards it, because it's not the cherry, it's the cake. That's maybe interesting. And so that's, yeah, that sort of feeds within that.
Yeah, I think it's the physicality of of the object. I don't know. I have 2 boys, and one of them is crazy about photography because he loves something, which is volcanoes. And then, because of course he lived for 13 years in Mexico, then there's a volcano there that is called the Paricutin. So every time I go to Mexico, when you go to the flea market, please find for me pictures of. And then he's collecting vinyls. My other son is taking photos on film. So these guys are going back. So I think the thing about physicality, everything being so digital, I think makes me think that it's going to be huge in the future, not the other way around.
And for you, what do you sort of, as we're, before we do a Q&A?
Well, I think that what I'm witnessing is a more critical approach after maybe experimental approach or a fun approach that it's what you can see in many books. No, now maybe you have like a more like a transversal view of things, and it was just coming to my mind. Talking about physicality, no, probably the first big experiment it comes to my mind is evidence, no? And it's about vernacular photography, and a specific kind of a vernacular photography that are like police archives or like a big defense company archives. And the very ambivalence of that work was based on the quality of the photographic material Larry Sultan and Mike Mandel played with.
yeah. Just would like to add that the question of vernacular photography also concerns digital photography.
Of course.
Yes, and we see that in the practice of artists like Penelope Umbrico or others, or Thomas Mailander, they go and collect images on the web and rework them and make us see things we wouldn't see otherwise because we're so taken in the flow of images. So, of course, we all agree it's super linked to the question of materiality, but vernacular also practices, commercial practices also are digital as well.
I mean, and we have very famous artists, Joachim Schmidt and Eric Kessels, who use the vernacular of today in a way that I guess we don't also have certain terminology yet, because it's much easier to talk about the past than to talk about what is happening right now, because that's even more in flux in terms of terminology than what we had in the past.
Maybe talking
please.
about history of photography or history of art, we can start talking about history of images, and that creates now a wider ocean, as you were mentioning, where there is digital material and everything. Now we are dealing with icons and with patterns that are now clearly, more and more clearly set in order. No?
Yeah. It just made me think that the interest for vernacular photography is maybe as well linked to the fact that the practice of preservation are changing. You mentioned it. We produce now a lot of images that are not meant to be preserved, like family photos, etc. And this is a super shift in the history of images. We're producing many images that are not here, that are not produced to be kept. When for years, at least 200 years, we've produced images in order to keep them, archive them, whether they are domestic or professional. And this big shift maybe helps us to, leads us to really be super excited with what we can have hold in our hand.
Well, we also have to shift that so far what history kept and what we know from history is kept by those who have the means to keep things. So usually our history is told by the ones in power, and now we have a historic timeline and historic stories by those who are not in power, but who just lived history. And I guess that's also why, as you say, so many people are excited about vernacular, because we have these stories of everyday people that are now come out into the open, and we can all relate to it. It's not just numbers and facts that talk to us about history. Maybe at this point we open it up to maybe some questions that are in the audience. Maybe some of you are involved in vernacular photography, artists, creators, collectors who have some ideas, thoughts to share, something you want to ask. You have 4 brains here who are happy. Please.
You include the concept of digital when we're talking about the vernacular photography, like something that we're touching. I don't know if us, because we're not so young, but probably in 30 years or in 50, when the festival will keep existing and some kids will be here, they will be talking about vernacular photography of all the things that we are extra photographing now, no? And it's all digital.
Sure, because maybe you have something specific? Go for it.
Well, maybe we can do. No, but it's interesting because today I was reading something by Olivier Cablat that it was right about what you were mentioning, and it was having a critical approach, talking about fake news, no, and fake news that are related to artificial intelligence, digital, and these wider world we are facing now. No, so vernacular is now something really worth it to face.
I think for all of us who collect vernacular photography, I think we need to at least appreciate that. I think we're heading towards a really critical moment for vernacular photography. I think, first of all, we have to accept that it encompasses the majority of photography that's out there. Like, it is our visual history of the past. And I started working with AI earlier this year, and I think we have a real danger of our historic past becoming distorted if we don't preserve vernacular photographs, actually have the physical copies of them there to show that this was the reality of the past. Soon we're going to start seeing artificial vernacular photographs appear of groups of people who never existed, people who never met each other together, and this is going to have political implications going forward.
Well, there's a very interesting exhibition in the Brazilian section. I don't know if you saw it. Sorry, I forgot the name of the artist who created this fictional couple. Marea Ferum. Okay. Thank you. But this is really interesting to see because, for one, it's incredibly well done, and it really talks in some respects about that. But I thought it was a very smart and very good work.
I just think we need to start thinking about having some sort of structures in place to how do we preserve the authenticity of vernacular photographs before they get ingested into the AI.
I think authenticity is a very tricky word.
Well, but a good point you raised is that we have more vernacular photography than any other photography in this planet. Just so, please.
Thanks. I'm really enjoying this panel. Thank you so much. And I have some thoughts and questions as an archivist, because that's my job. I'm an audiovisual archivist. And I work on projects that connect communities, artists, and collectors with institutions. So, I mean, first of all, I want to say that we are developing standards for preservation for people of their cell phone photography, but that funding for that project was pulled by the current administration in the United States this year, and they have pulled funding for most archive and library projects. So I just want to note that that is like in the works, that can be used by communities too, not just by institutions. But something that comes up in my field a lot that I'm really curious how you all are handling is we used to talk about access, like how can we get more people to use archival collections? How can we connect with communities more? How can we get more people to see vernacular photography? But now there are a lot more questions about how do we pull back and have respect for the people in the photos when we're exhibiting them, when we're curating them, when we're putting collections out. So as curators and collectors, I'm really curious, like, what ethical structures do you create for yourselves when you are, what questions about representation do you ask when you're putting these together?
It's a very important question. Maybe can I give that difficult one to you before I add my sauce to it?
Thank you for this question. It's something I very often think about. And we are often confronted, like in jury of awards, when artists propose like to cut images or, it's some, I mean, there's no ethical statement, maybe something we could think about together. But of course, the idea is that the message, the sense, what is tell has to connect with what is done with and of course it's super subjective, but we do have to be vigilant. I totally agree with what it means to also in the way we collect images and the way we use them, because there are no limits. The limit is the imagination of the artist. I mean, of course, when the archive come from an institution, you're not going to cut them or like paint on them. You will have to use their reproduction to do that. But
yeah, it's something I start collections, quite a few, and one specifically in Myanmar. It's called the Myanmar Photo Archive, and because it's a country that has no visual depository at all, except for colonial archives. So the collection we have, the archive, the collection, is the only one in the world, which means whatever we have, show, and use is the visual representation of the past of this country. And of course, that's a huge burden. So we constantly ask ourselves, and I'm a foreigner there, of course, that's not a whole big issue. But we constantly ask ourselves, what do we do with these materials? And what is the copyright issue? What is how do we deal with this gray zone of appropriation? And one solution we found in Myanmar was that we just get local thinkers together and we discuss it. And we create some kind of a platform to come to an agreement. we don't agree, but we come to an agreement of what these materials are and how to use them, and that's the best we can do at this very moment. And we for us in the Myanmar Photo Archive, we sort of come to this conclusion that we apply fair use, which means we don't promote a single image or would sell a single image of this archive, let's say to an advertiser, which we get lots of questions asked, demands, but we use it always within a historical context. And if a copyright holder or someone with personal right, a person comes to us, we have to deal with it on an individual basis. So far, everything has been very positive for us in Myanmar. Someone comes to us and has seen himself or herself in an exhibition, and it's hooray, I'm in an exhibition. But yes, of course, this is a very, very important question where we have no guidelines. There are copyright laws depending on the country, but we have no exact guidelines. And I think we can only navigate that through negotiation, through conversation, and be totally transparent about that it is a gray zone. I think that's the most important part, that it's clear. We're working, I mean, most of these books we have here, tables, are in a complete gray zone in terms of personal right. And yeah, we have to be.
Yeah, and I think it's also very important to trust the artists or the people. They can be a cook, a chief, or anyone who has something, feels something with an archive, or feels like making something creative. We have to help them, and in order that they can access to, because they have things to say, and they enlight it, and we have really to encourage it. I'm saying that because many artists also are hoping to work with such or such archive, which are an institution, but it's difficult. There are, of course, questions of author rights or I don't know what, but there's this need. You feel it. I feel it as a curator. They have things to say, and they show us the way as well. So to trust them as well is very important.
Because the interesting thing, I mean, that's thinking about the publishing world. If you can publish all these things, you don't need to be a real rights holder. There's no law that forbids you from publishing a photo you found that actually you have no copyright to. Just as an info. That's, in a way, that's bizarre, but I mean, we operate all like this. So we're in a constant limbo world, actually, of no real rule, and we're an unregulated entity, the culture.
I think it depends on the country, because in France it's more complicated. Author rights is very protected.
But with anonymous photographs, there's enormous amount of publications that there's no.
If it comes from the private field, but if it's in an institution, we have to search and try and find the origin. And that's why when we collect in archive institution, we try to gather everything we can and take notes and record testimony in order to not to be cut from the information.
Right. So thank you for that. Very, very important. Could be 12 panels just on that question. Anybody else? Question?
I do have a question, because this is all very new for me. So I coming from Brazil, what we are able to find there is much more limited than like the flea markets in here, for example, and even other countries that I've traveled. So I was just wondering if you guys know of other people that do the work that you do in these other countries, that where you have more limited access to like archives that didn't come from a colonizer, or even like the limited access to cameras for people to do these photographs themselves. So anybody?
Maybe Ramon, in Latin America, do you know other sort of accessible archives?
Yes, we publish a book by him also. Yeah, but the thing with that is that, I mean, I own my own collection, for instance. If someone wants to see it and gets in touch with me, I will be really happy. But there's no one that called me for these reasons, except when I publish a book. Then they know about it, then they come. But I mean, I know a lot of collectors, because I know the guys that go to Mexico in the flea markets, because we are all the same guys picking up photos. But I mean, there is a moment right now that, and what do you, I mean, I have like 10, 11,000 photos. No one knows what I have. Not even I know what I have sometimes. And so it's difficult So people doesn't really know what you have. Maybe what I do receive is like they're doing something, some book about whatever, and they tell me, "Do you have books of that specific thing?" Then I take photos with my phone, I send them, and if they need it, of course, I always give them for free in terms of whatever they need. I mean, because I'm looking forward to share what I have, as all collectors do. But there, it's not regulated. There's no, oh, no, yeah, you tried.
Maybe there is a methodology that goes a little bit beyond the flea markets. Now, if you think about anthropology, for instance, is going investigating and creating relationships with communities. And thanks for using this word, which is very important, I think, besides the institutional work. And it's going in little cities, villages, families, and find way more than we can expect.
Yeah, I mean, that's also, I think, for depending on the kind of work a researcher does. I mean, a lot of the archives that also I work it's field work. It's the work we do in Myanmar, in Afghanistan or Pakistan. There are no archives, just like in many other countries, and you just do the digging. There's still so many photo studios, small photo studios you will find in Brazil that still have somewhere their rolls of film because they couldn't throw it away, even if the parents passed, but it's still somewhere a memory attached. And I'm sure there's lots of depositories of that. And that's then, as Ramon mentioned, that sort of ground up creating a collection that in the end becomes maybe an institutional archive in the future. Okay, we have a few books here. You can also come to the front and ask us personally questions if you're too shy to ask them in the public. So thank you to the three of you for joining us. Thank you very much. Thank you, France PhotoBook, for organizing this. And there's some, I think your publishing house, is it here or is it in Collège Saint-Charles?
No, it's here.
It's here. So RM Publishing Editions is here. You can look at the books that he's also published. You can look at some of the things here. And yeah, if you have any questions, come down and talk to us. Thank you very much. We have two of my books here. Yeah. So thank you very much.